Good day to you, Summoner, and welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. To complete the third preview of our incoming champions, we're going to show you VEIGAR, the tiny master of evil. He's quite an interesting champion to bring some new things to the Wild Rift. So let's start with the ability rundown. His passive ability is called Phenomenal Evil Power. VEIGAR is the greatest evil to ever strike at the heart of Runeterra, and he's only getting bigger. Striking an enemy champion with a spell grants VEIGAR a stack of Phenomenal Evil, giving him ability power, and on top of that, takedowns even grant additional stacks. So basically, he's the AP version of a Nasus. And now let's move on to his first ability, called Baleful Strike. It unleashes a ball of dark energy dealing magic damage to the first two enemies hit. Killing a unit with this ability grants VEIGAR a stack of Phenomenal Evil. Large minions and monsters, at least on the PC version, grant 2 stacks. And for the second ability, we have Dark Matter. After a brief delay, Dark Matter falls from the sky to the target location, dealing magic damage. On the PC version, every 50 stacks of Phenomenal Evil reduce the cooldown by 10%. So you can already imagine what happens if you leave a VEIGAR alone for too long. It turns out pushing into this champion becomes impossible. And the reason why is in his third ability. It's called Event Horizon. After a short delay, yet again, VEIGAR twists the edges of space around the target area, forming a pentagon of walls. Enemies who attempt to pass through the perimeter are stopped and stunned. And with that, we have the most annoying ability for the VEIGAR. He can basically shut off every entrance to an objective and force the enemy to wait. However, if they walk into it, they're in for a quick treat of his burst power. And there's another thing we have to talk about. In case VEIGAR can place the cage into the wall, making it basically invisible to the enemy, we have a big problem. If you remember, Orianna can do the same. In a fight, she can hide the ball in a wall, which means the enemy has less reaction time. Plus, they might not even know it's in there. And then, well, you all know what's going to happen after the Orianna catches your entire team with their ultimate ability. And for VEIGAR's ultimate ability, we have something else. It is called Primordial Burst. It blasts the target with primal magic and deals magic damage increasing on the target's missing health. The damage is maximized against targets below 33% HP. And trust me, this ability is going to hurt. On the PC version of this game, you have seen a lot of VEIGARs literally one-shotting an enemy AD carry from 100 to 0 just with this ability. But before you call for nerfs already, let's talk about our question of the day. If you could nerf something about the jungle role, what would you change? Let me know in the comments below. Now let's talk about the early, mid and late game for the VEIGAR, starting with the early game. In the early game, VEIGAR is quite weak and needs to scale and farm up. However, it doesn't mean he's completely useless. He can still set up ganks with his cage and can easily force a flash that way. Also, if the enemy takes a full combo by this guy, it's still going to hurt a lot. So even in the early game, you have to watch out for his utility. But as we transition into the mid game, everything changes. As objectives come up, we can now dictate the playing field by placing or holding our cage strategically. And on top of that, we now have enough damage to threaten the enemy champions. And by threaten, I mean free-shotting them. Because anything that gets too close to a VEIGAR, unless it has a lot of HP and magic resist, is going to die quite fast. And now with that, we are moving into the late game. The enemy team has to permanently respect our cages. And even though champions have a lot of access to early tenacity and a lot of tenacity, being CC'd for a brief moment might be enough to get you killed by the little man. And usually carries struggle to get more magic resist and HP. They have 30 to 40 base resistances and get maximum plus 10 from the Mercury threats. And if they don't have any HP in their build paths, they're quite squishy. And as a consequence, they're always in danger of getting instantly blown up. Also, for the other players out there, enemy carry champions struggle a lot. They can't build really defensively without sacrificing a lot of damage. And even if they do so, they can't get tanky enough to deal with the amounts of damage you're dealing. So always keep in mind that different champions get different magic resist per level and armor per level, which means a carry is naturally squishier than a tankier champion. For example, a Draven is way squishier than a Gragas. And if you put that into your calculations, in items, you can get to quite some interesting item builds that penetrate up to 55 magic resist, which is a number any AD carry cannot easily reach without investing some money into defensive stats. And as those defensive stats usually block an item slot, this can really stagger the item builds. And now let's talk about the teamfight of this champion. The most valuable cooldown of this champion is literally the cage. It's the way you influence the fight the most, and you can play front to back and peel for your entire team while you pressure the enemy team. Here it's not only about how you use the spell, it's also about how you hold the spell. Because you should never forget, a cooldown matters being available or not available. The enemy might take advantage of this, so please watch out. And now let's talk about the possible combinations for a VEIGAR and where he might be played. Number 1, we have the Senna and VEIGAR bot lane. Nothing special, just a typical mage with the Senna on bot lane. On top of that, we have the typical VEIGAR mid lane as a normal mage. But now we get into funny territory. You might even pick the VEIGAR as an AD carry, of course with AP items. But with a CC support, for example a Leona or a Rakan, it might work, and by might, it's a lot of CC, so it will surely work. Speaking of support, he might also be played as a support with the sole reason of getting as much CDR as possible, maxing his third ability first and provide as many cages as he can. Because zone control is important, because if your AD carry can play and has space to play in, he'll deal a lot of damage. And now let's get to some builds to think about. VEIGAR is a bit special. Keep in mind, VEIGAR gets stacks over time, so he has infinite scaling. So does this mean we only need offensive items? Maybe we can do something else. For example, think about VEIGAR's most important cooldown. It's this cage, and it's a skill shot with a certain range. So in order to make it hit, we need to get close enough. So what about items that grant us movement speed? And with the movement speed we can combine some HPs, which makes us naturally tanky. And if we think about some crazy build combinations, we can come up with this build number 1. Keep in mind, this build is CDR starved, so we won't have many cooldowns early on. For the first item, you go Rod of Ages. The second item is Deadman's Plate for the movement speed and some HPs. Then we need a Rabadon's Death Cap. Let's be honest, infinite scaling AP, we need a Rabadon. It is what it is. Afterwards, we can go for an Infinity Orb and then a Void Staff. Depending on the enemy MR, those two are interchangeable. And for the boots, we just want the Lucidity boots. More CDR, the better. But even after getting to this point, there's still something we can take into consideration. For VEIGAR, yet again infinite scaling, and there's one item that scales quite well with AP, and the name is Lichbane. So rather than for example going for the Infinity Orb, we could go for Lichbane to apply even more damage, because our cooldowns are not really that high, as we reach the later stages of the game. So summarizing this build, it's a pretty tanky build that allows us to engage the enemy. We could even think about items such as a Glorious Enchant or a Ghosties Enchant. It's really up to your imagination how you want to utilize this champion, but if you want to play him, please ban Olaf. And more importantly, ban Katarina, because laning against those champions with that champion is absolute pain. But now we move on to a more squishy build, but with more CDR. For our first item we go Archangel's Staff. The second item is already a big choice. We can make the call between Deadman's Blade, Force of Nature or Abyssal Mask. Here we need to make the call depending on what we are facing. For example, and that means if we need to get close utility-wise and the enemy has a lot of physical damage. The Force of Nature is quite good against poke mages as it grants us HP, MR and movement speed alike. For champions that want to dive into us and are AP as well, we go Abyssal Mask, because this way we get tankier and deal more damage at the same time. So when we're facing a Diana, Abyssal Mask, not a bad item. And then afterwards, it's yet again a Rabadon's Death Cap. You will not see a VEIGAR build without this item, it is just what it is. And afterwards, yet again, the Void Staff with the Infinity Orb, interchangeable. And if you want, you can go Lichbane here as well. And if you're familiar with the PC version of this game, quite a few seasons back you would even see a Nash's Tooth on VEIGAR in some situations. This is very rare, but it might happen. So let's keep it up on your minds and maybe find a time to make it work. But what after all makes this champion so interesting? It's the ability to be flexed in so many positions, and he can build so many different items to accomplish a different purpose. He can be this glass cannon mage and he can be this tanky engage mage. He can also be a godlike peeler. Whatever it is, you can make it work with this champion. But in the end, I'm curious what build ideas you guys come up with. It's always a pleasure seeing something interesting and new, because you never know if this might be the next meta build. And that concludes today's video. Thank you all for watching, smash the sub button and see you tomorrow for another Wild Rift video. See ya.